So welcome back to the crochet tutorial with Cosy Rosie UK, and today I'm going to be sharing with you how to create your very own crocheted footstool. So as you can see, I've got a wide array of materials on my table here and a couple of extra things that aren't normally used in a crochet pattern, which I think is what makes this extra unique. They are both optional as well. But let me start by talking you through my yarn choices. I'm going to be using Paintbox Yarns Cotton Aran. Now this is a size 4 yarn and 100% cotton. So in the UK it's Aran, the equivalent is a worsted weight in America. And I've got two colours here, champagne white and granite grey. And I'm actually holding two strands together throughout this pattern and changing the colours of the strands that I'm holding to almost create my very own ombre look pattern. So one of the things that I absolutely love about using double-stranded yarn is that you can create your own colorways using two different strands and working different colors in the same rows so that you can work up this almost ombre effect. So even though this yarn has a recommended hook size of 4.5mm, I would normally use a 5 with it anyway. Because I'm working two strands together, I'm going to be using a 6mm hook. Please don't ask me why I've picked up one of these old hooks. It was just the first 6mm that I found, and you can see how well loved this is because the paint is fading off of it. Sometimes these are just as comfortable for me as an ergonomic hook. You're obviously going to need a darning needle for chunky weight yarn because there's going to be two strands to weave in whenever we change colour, a pair of scissors, because we are going to be changing colours frequently, and these two extra items. So this footstool is worked in two pieces of crochet fabric. The top, which is worked all in one piece, a bottom panel, and then we are joining them together on three sides, with the fourth side being joined with Velcro or hook and eye closure. I think it's called hook and loop, maybe. I'm not sure what the unbranded term for it is. Generalized term in the UK is Velcro. I actually have real Velcro for some reason, but we had that in store. To create the actual footstool, I have found these hairpin feet on Amazon. I'll link them below for you. And I've selected some quite heavy duty MDF, which is where they squish together lots of fibre. And if I could get this corner on, oh dear. And very simply and I'm going to screw these feet onto a board of MDF. So I've got 4 of these feet. So I've got 4 of these feet, 1 for each corner, and then between them, and I'm going to pre-drill these holes before fixing my crocheted base to this MDF, and then attaching the side panels to 3 edges around this board. This is entirely optional. You can just follow this pattern to create a floor pillow, but I think to create a piece of furniture using crochet is a really exciting opportunity. So the finished size of my footstool is 24 inches wide, roughly 60 centimeters, and 20 inches long, whichever way around you want to use that. So 24 by 20, and then I have a depth of 10 inches, plus these are 4-inch feet, I think roughly, well, 5-inch really. And then of course you've got this, the depth of the wood is internal of the actual cushion pad. So this is going to be hidden inside. And this is a 20mm board of MDF that I had cut to size in the UK we'll say B&Q, but it will be in our local hardware store, but we don't have local hardware stores anymore in this country. Now I've got 2 colours that I'm using. This is going to be colour A and this is going to be colour B. And because we're double stranding, we're going to start working A and A, and then A and B, followed by, A and B, followed by B and B, and then A and B. And we're just going to kind of circle back, and that's what creates that almost ombre look. If you want to grab some yarn from your stash, you're looking to create a chunky weight yarn. I'm using cotton because this is potentially going to be used outside, although I'm not going to leave it outside for long periods of time. But I have made it so that the internal cushion is removable, which for me is quite an important feature. So grab your yarn, grab your 6mm hook, and let's get stitching. If you're not familiar with working with 2 strands of yarn, the easiest way that I find is to actually have ideally 2 balls. They are going to look like they're getting tangled, but I promise you they won't, providing you don't have to undo it. And we're going to literally work it the same as you would as if it's 1 strand of yarn. There's no difference to it at all. I even make my slip knot using those 2 strands of yarn and then place that loop as normal onto my hook. I simply then hold those 2 strands as if I am holding 1. So we're going to start by making our top panel, which is worked all in one. We start by creating one of our sides, so we need it to be as wide as we need it to be for the first side. We are then going to extend out on each side to continue working the panel and the 2 extra side pieces as well. Once we've worked those additional side pieces to the total length that we need, we then work on that final side of the cushion before fastening off and making our base. So for me, the first part of this pattern is going to measure 20 inches, which is the shorter side of my MDF piece of wood. With colour A and colour A, we're going to start by making a chain of 56. So we simply yarn over and pull through. We need to make sure that we are constantly working with both loops on our hook without dropping one of those strands. That's the only challenge, is making sure you work through both strands. It's easy just to pick up one. And we're just going to make our chain of 56. Why is that now getting involved? So continue on making your chain of 56 and I'll see you in a moment. Once you've completed your chain of 56, we're going to start working into our second chain from hook. Remembering this loop doesn't count. There's our first loop. We're going to yarn over, ready to work under both loops of that top bit of our chain. We're going to insert, yarn over to bring up the equivalent of a third loop, even though we have like 3 pairs of loops of yarn. And then we're going to yarn over and pull through all of those loops to create our first half double crochet. We're going to work 1 half double crochet into the next and each chain across to complete row 1. So we're going to work 1 half double crochet into each chain all the way back to our beginning slip knot. So continue to work across, making sure that you're working with both loops of yarn, and then I'll see you shortly for row 2. So once you've worked 1 half double crochet into each chain across, you should have a stitch count of 55 half double crochets. Now, as you can see, I'm already ready with my first ball of colour B, because we're going to change colour for row 2, working 1 strand of colour A, my graphite, and 1 strand of colour B, which is champagne white. So to make that colour change as simple as possible, we're going to undo that last stitch that we worked, yarn over, reinsert as if we're about to complete it and bring our loop up, but we pause there. We're going to drop 1 strand of our current colour and yarn over and just hold that ready. Bring in colour B, place it over the hook with the end at the back, and complete our last stitch with both colour A and colour B. Now the unworked yarn of colour A, we can simply fasten off, because we're not going to need that for a while, and move that out of the way. And then, if I can get that end off, there we are. Our working strands, we now have 1 colour A and 1 strand of colour B. So for row 2, we're going to begin with our chain of 1. We turn our work and we are ready to work back along the top of row 1, working 1 half double crochet into each stitch across. I'm just going to bring those ends around the back because I am going to weave them as I go. So I've yarned over, ready to work into the same stitch as our chain 1, because our chain 1 does not count. I'm just going to place those ends over the top as well. And then once I've yarned over and brought through, I can pull through all the remaining loops and make sure those ends are going to be buried. We're just going to work row 2, working one strand of colour A and one strand of colour B, exactly the same as we did for round 1, except we're working into the top of the stitches. And it's going to create this almost random colourway. We're almost creating our own colourway by holding these 2 strands together. I'm not making sure that they're going through my hands in the same order all the time. I don't want it to look too uniform, but I am making sure I have a nice even tension when working these stitches so that there's not too much yarn coming through or too many knots. I think I've still got the end there we are. But you can see that they are coming out of the ball at different rates. And we are simply going to work the remainder of row 2, working one strand of colour A, one strand of colour B. At the end of row 2, we're going to have the same stitch count, which should be 55 half double crochets. And we're always making sure that we've got both strands of yarn in work at the same time, which means we're not dropping one as we pull through. You'll know when you have, because it will look like that. And if you pull down, yes, that is secure, but it's going to make your stitch a lot smaller. It's simply worth pulling back and undoing if you can, and just reworking that stitch, making sure that you're grabbing both strands as you pull through. So continue to work across the remainder of row 2 and I will meet you for row 3. So at the end of row 2, you should still have a stitch count of 55 half double crochets, but they've been worked in those 2 colours. And row 3 is simply a repeat of row 2, where we're working with both strand A and strand B, and we're making our turning chain of 1, ready to work 1 half double crochet into each stitch across. So there's no need to change any colours at the end of this row if you're following the same colour pattern as me. So continue across to the end of row 3. You'll still have a stitch count of 55 half double crochets, and we're going to be changing to 2 strands of colour B at the end of row 3. So I've just reached my final stitch of row 3, and we're changing this time so that we're working 2 strands of colour B, which for me is this champagne white. Here's one I prepared earlier, luckily. I won't show you how much yarn came out of the ball, it's okay. So I'm simply doing the same as we did before. I've just yarn over and brought my loop back up for my final stitch. I'm yarning over with my current strand of colour B and adding in a second strand with the tail at the back, and I've dropped my colour A strand, ready to pull through all 3 loops and complete that final stitch so that I have 2 loops of colour B. Gets a little bit fiddly when you're first making these colour changes, but I promise it does get easier. You can of course leave these attached and carry them up if you want to. I would rather weave the ends in than risk getting knotty, so I'm just making sure I leave a nice 5, maybe 6 inch tail that I can weave in later, / hide inside my footrest. So once you are ready with your 2 strands of colour B, we're going to work row 4. And row 4 is simply working 1 half double crochet into each stitch across. Oh, we've done our chain 1 and we're ready to work 1 half double crochet into each stitch across, but this time we're working with 2 strands of colour B. So we're getting a completely clean champagne white row. So you can see that it kind of makes it look more like a gradient with the 2 colours swapping backwards and forwards. So continue across working 2 strands of colour B, working 1 half double crochet into each stitch across, and I'll meet you at the final stitch to change back to working one strand of colour A and one strand of colour B. So I've worked all the way along and I'm in my final stitch, just making that yarn over in those 2 strands of colour A, and we can drop one of these strands of colour A. I'm going to fasten mine off so I don't get myself confused. I'm going to yarn over ready with colour B, ready to add in our second strand, this time in colour A, so that we're working these 2 colours in our next row, and we're going back to working 2 rows working colour A and colour B. If I can pick up the right strand, there we are. So we're repeating row 2 again, working colour A and colour B. So we start with our chain of 1. I'm going to turn, yarn over, and also make sure I'm working over these ends before inserting my hook, bringing that loop up and pulling through all 3, just as we've done before. This time we're back to working 2 rows, working colour A and colour B all the way across. So we're doing the first row and then the second row, and then we're going to be ready to start our pattern repeat. So continue across to complete rows 5 and 6, working 1 strand of colour A and 1 strand of colour B, and I will meet you for row 7. So at the end of row 6, we are ready to change back to 2 strands of colour A. So I'm going to yarn over with the colour A and grab that second strand of colour A and complete that stitch. Just going to make my chain 1 to secure, and then I am ready. Oh no, I need to fasten off that white. Ready to continue on, working row 7, working 2 strands of colour A. So continue across, working 2 strands of colour A all the way across to the end. Remembering in that last stitch, we are going to change back to working 1 strand of colour A and 1 strand of colour B. But I'm also going to tell you your pattern repeat for the remainder of this part of your panel. Just at my final stitch of row 7, ready to add in our strand of colour B. Getting these confused, there we are. And I'm just going to make a chain 1 to secure, if I can find the ends, so I can talk to you about our pattern repeat. Pull up my hook for a moment. So we are going to be repeating row 2 up to row 7 that we've just worked a further 2 times, so you have a total row count of 19. So repeating row 2 to 7 a further 2 times, and then I'm going to meet you for row 20, which is where we'll go back to a repeat of row 2 again effectively. And from there, for row 21, we're going to be needing to add on some additional chains, ready to work on the additional width we need to make this a 1 panel top for our cushion for our footstool. So continue to repeat rows 2 to 7 a further 2 times, and I'll meet you back for row 20. So I have just finished row 20, working that A-B row. So for row 21, we're making our chain of 1 and working 1/2 double crochet into the same as our chain 1 and each stitch across, and then we're going to be adding some extras onto the end, and then we're going to be adding some extras onto the beginning of this row. So work across, working 1/2 double crochet into each stitch, and I'll meet you for the second part of row 21. So I've worked across to my final stitch of row 21, but before I carry on and work that final stitch, I'm just going to bring up my loop and remove my hook and return back to the beginning of row 21. And what we're going to do is add an additional chain so that we can work back into that chain as part of row 22. So I'm going to insert my hook into the first stitch of row 21, and then I'm just going to use some, I'm going to grab 2 strands of colour B and just pull through. I don't want to get in the way of this stitch because we still need to, wow, really, because we still need to work through this stitch as we come back to it. And making sure that I've left long enough a tail, we're going to make a chain of 25. That's 2, 3, 4, 22, 23, 24, and 25. Now I'm going to make a chain of 26 because I'm going to use that last chain as a little knot to fasten off. Cut those strands, and you see how that chain almost disappears. So I still have 25 chains that we're going to use in row 22, and I can still work into this stitch when we get to it because it's not in the way. So going back to our final stitch for row 21, just going to pop those loops back on my hook, and then I can work my final stitch changing to colour B, 2 strands of colour B. Oh, I've got in wrong there. There we go. So we can change back to 2 strands of colour B. If I find an end again, that one's attached, I think. Yep. Just place that over, changing back to colour B to end row 21. So at the moment, at the end of row 21, you're going to have your 55 half double crochets and a chain, an extra chain of 25. So going into row 22, we have 2 strands of colour B, and we are, and I've already done my chain 1, but we're actually going to do a beginning chain of 26. So that's number 1. So we're just making the same length of chain as we've already added to the beginning of row 21. Once you've made your chain of 26, we're going to turn our work, and this chain is now the beginning of row 22. We've made our chain of 26, and we are going to work 1 half double crochet into the second chain from hook. Remembering our loop doesn't count, there's our first. We're yarning over and working a half double crochet into that second chain from hook. And then we're working 1 half double crochet into each stitch across, back down. So we have added an extra 25 stitches. So once we've worked into that second chain from hook, we're working 1 half double crochet into each of the next 24 chains. That's 1, 2, and then we're going to continue to work across the row just as you would normally, working 1 half double crochet into each stitch across. It is worth double checking that from the beginning of that chain up to the end you have added 25 chains, 25 stitches. We're going to continue across working, ignoring that knot for a moment. So we're going to continue to work all the way across the top of this row, and then we're going to work into this chain that we've already added. So continue to work across, working 1 half double crochet into each of the next 55 stitches, and I'll meet you to work into our next chain. So once we've worked all the way across, I've reached my final stitch, and I need to make sure that I work into that final stitch where we joined our additional chain. And I'm just going to tighten that up, and we are ready to work 1 half double crochet. Gonna have to secure that into each of our chains across, and my chain is back to front, so it's up to you how you work into your chain. You can work into your back bump, just work through the top loop as I'm doing, but again we're adding 25 stitches onto this end. So that's number 24 and number 25. So we've added 25 half double crochets onto this end, and we have the extra 25 on this end. So now our stitch count at the end of row 22 is going to be 105 half double crochets. Obviously I need to change back, I forgot. I'm adding back in one strand of colour B. Just going to place that over, ready for row 23. Oops. So going into row 23, we are continuing, repeating row 2, but this time our stitch count is going to be 105 half double crochets. So yeah, our project has got quite a bit wider, and if you're adjusting your pattern to fit your own depth, this added extra should be the same depth that you've made your first kind of side panel, because they are going to join, which is really hard to explain when it looks like this, but you have to trust me on this one. So including row 23, going all the way up to row 64, we are repeating row 2 with a stitch count of 105 half double crochets. Oh, if I could not split my yarn, that would be great right now. So for row 23 up to row 64, we're continuing to repeat row 2. It's just our stitch count has increased to 105, and we can continue with the same colour pattern as well. So there's nothing really more to think about. We're just crocheting for a little while. So for rows 23 up to 64, we are repeating row 2, and we're continuing our stitch pattern that we were using for rows 2 to 7. And we're going to be repeating that colour pattern repeat for a total of 6 times, ending on 2 strands of colour A. And that's where I'm going to meet you back for row 65, where we're going to be reducing our stitch count back down. So continue ahead. So continue on working that repeat of rows 2 to 7 a further 6 times, and I'll meet you for row 65. So I've completed up to row 64, continuing with our colour pattern, and this edge, so we've got 10 inches this way and then all the way up to here, now measures the longest part of my MDF, which is 24 inches. And we're going to have to fasten off and reduce the number of stitches that we're working. So I'm just going to work my final stitch. It appears that I haven't. Oh, I've done a chain one as well, that's never helpful. Just going to work my final stitch in this row, which looks impossible to get my hook through. There we go. And for once, we're not going to change colours. I'm just going to make a little chain one and fasten off both of these strands and pull that through. But before I do anything else, I'm going to turn my project, because we need to rejoin as if we're working this row. So our tail should be on this side of our project, and what we're going to do is to reduce our count, our stitch count by the additional number of stitches we worked to add that extra side panel. So for me, I will be rejoining my yarn in the 26th stitch across. So I'm simply going to count from where I've just fastened off, counting my stitches across so that I'm working the same number of stitches in the middle. So for me, that is 26. I'm going to join there. If you've adjusted your pattern, you need to make sure that you've left the same number of stitches that you added on to this extra section that we worked after the first section. So this was our first, this is so big now, sorry. So we started all the way back here with row 1, and we worked those first rows. We then added on that extra width on each side, and we're now going to be decreasing the number of stitches worked to the same number that we had originally. So we should be, so if we were to count in from the other side where we're not joining, we're going to have skipped stitches the same amount on each side of this panel, and we're going to work in the middle stitches only to the same count of 55 half double crochets. Of course, we're joining one strand of colour A and one strand of colour B. So I'm just going to get those ready. And you can either use a slip knot or just do as I will do, which is just place both strands over your hook and bring it through, ready to make a chain of one. I've got an end, there we are, with colour A and B, and then we're going to work into the same stitch that we've joined, working our first half double crochet. We're going to work across, working one half double crochet into the next 54 stitches, and that will give us our stitch count of 55, and then you should have a remaining 25 stitches on this end that remain unworked. So continue across, working one half double crochet into each of the next 54 stitches plus the one that we joined into, and that will be the total number of stitches for row 65. So you should have a total stitch count of 55 half double crochets. So I have just double checked all of my counting. So from where I've rejoined, I have 25 unworked stitches beginning from my tail. We rejoined, we've worked one half double crochet into the same as our join and our chain one, and into the next 54 stitches to give me a stitch count of 55, which I know is spot on. And I've just double checked that I still have 25 unworked stitches on the other end, and provided you made no changes or any adjustments to the pattern, you should be exactly the same. So for rows 66 all the way up to 88, we are repeating row 2, continuing in our colour pattern, and you should end on colour AA. So you should end on 2 rows, you should end on working 2 strands of colour A for row 88. So I'm going to make my turning chain of 1, and of course I'm still repeating row 2, but I'm doing my second row of strand A and B together, and I'm continuing to work all the way up to row 88. Of course you can fasten off, you're going to have a few ends to weave in, as you can see I certainly have a few. It's going to go onto our MDF. So once you've worked all 88 rows and you've fastened off, of course you're going to weave all your ends in, but you need to decide which side of your fabric you prefer. I have gone for this as my right side of my fabric. It is entirely up to you, but the best thing that we have to do now is we're going to be joining our corners so that we can create the kind of cube shape that we're looking to fit our pillows or our duvet covers inside. So this corner I've already done, and it's really hard to show on camera, but effectively we're going to be joining down each of the open kind of 90-degree angles so that we are bringing our cube together, so that when it stands up you have that cube shape, which you cannot see on camera. I'll try and take some photos and maybe insert it. So we're going to do this for each of these corners, and literally we're wanting to kind of place them together so that we can work all the way down and join them. And we need to have the right side of our fabric showing so that we end up with this really neat edge where we've joined them together. So to do that, we're going to join in the internal kind of corner. It looks like it would have been our first or our last stitch that we worked, or you can go through the kind of middle of it. I'm just going to go through this stitch here, and then I'm using the same colour to join all of my edges, which is colour A, and of course I'm using 2 strands, and we're just going to bring that through that kind of internal corner, making a chain 1 to secure. I'm going to keep these ends out, if I can find them. Where have they gone? Because I want to weave them in and keep this beginning as tight as I can. So where we've worked that chain 1, I'm just going to leave that and go into the next stitch, working over my end. And I want to go into the next kind of row end. So we're working the stitch side towards us on this corner and the row end is behind. So you can see that these are our rows and we know how many rows that we have, and we want to be working 1 stitch per row. So we need to make sure that we go into that first stitch and we are just making a single crochet. Oh, let me rearrange. And we're simply working 1 single crochet through each stitch and row end. So we've worked 1 single crochet here, we're going into the next stitch, and then I'm going to find the next row end. So I've worked into an AB row there, so this is the second AB row, and I'm just working another single crochet. Go into the next stitch, we're going into the A row there and working another single crochet, and we're just joining both of these kind of panels together along that 90-degree angle to create our cube shape. You can make sure that you're not working too many stitches into each of these rows by just working into each colour, if that makes sense. You've got 2 of those AB rows, there's 1 and there's 2. Oops. Just catching on that yarn there. Come back, try that again. Nope, still got it. There we go. And that was number 2. You can see from the other side, we can't actually that angle, let me do that. So when I kind of open it up, we can position those stitches so they're making a really nice join. And of course we're getting almost like a corner at the top, so we've got 3 sides that we need to create our cube. So we're going to continue down, making sure that you've got enough stitches and enough rows to work through. And then when you get to the end, you can just fasten off. So continue on, working through each stitch and the corresponding row end, working a single crochet through each. And I'll meet you in a moment once you've worked through all of those. So once you've worked all the way down, we are simply going to fasten off. So we're going to repeat this for all 4 of our 90-degree corners so that we can join them and create our 3-sided cube. But don't fasten off on your last join because we're going to work a round of single crochet all the way around the edge to help make joining the bottom panel, if we're making one, that little bit easier. So I just want to mention that because we're working them all with the right side facing on 2 of your joins, you're going to be working through the row ends closest to you, and it's just the same except you begin working your first stitch through your first row as opposed to through a stitch, but you're still kind of working across in the same ways. So this time we'd be working through our row end and then through our first stitch, and then we can continue down working through each row end and each stitch rather than the other way around. That's the only difference. So 2 are going to be facing this way, the way you're working through your row end first, and then 2 are going to be facing with your stitches first. So it doesn't matter which way you're working them, as long as you're working them from top to bottom, so there aren't any pesky ends at the top of our projects. They're all going to be at the bottom. Just get all 4 sides joined, and I'll meet you for that final one where we're going to continue on to neaten up that final edge. I'll see you in a moment for that final edging round. Once you've joined your final 90-degree corner, we are going to rotate our work, working along the end of our rows up to our next corner. So just like we've been doing, we're continuing with A and A, and we're just going to simply work into each row end, working 1 single crochet across. I'm going to work over any remaining ends that I have as well. And we're working all the way around to that next, corner join that we had. So once you've worked across all of those row ends and you've reached that next join, we're simply going to be then working into the bottom of row 88 that we finished off with, which is why I have so many ends here. And we're just continuing on, but this time we're working into the top of each stitch with one single crochet into the bottom of row 88. Now we're not aiming to do this tightly because you don't want to bunch this fabric up, but it will also help stabilize and minimize too much stretching of the fabric when we stuff it later and make it nice and firm. So continue across, working one single crochet into the end of row 88, all the way across to our next join, and I'll meet you there. Once you've worked all the way back along the top of row 88, we're rotating again and we're working back across these row ends across to our next join. So continue across, working into each row end, working one single crochet. Once you've worked, oh, nearly lost my hook there. Once you've worked all the way across the end of the rows and we're back to that next corner join again, we are going to continue across, but this time we're working into the other side. Move those ends out of the way for a moment. We're working into the other side of our beginning chain, and this will help neaten up any loose stitches you have in your chain. So you'll see there's your stitch, and at the other side you've got the remainder of your chain, and that's what we're working into. So we're just inserting our hook and continuing across, working one single crochet into each of our chains, our beginning chain. I'm working over my ends again, sorry. So you can see where the next one is, not in between the stitches, but actually into that chain. So just continue across, working one single crochet into each of your chains from your beginning chain way back when, and I'll meet you once you reach the end of this section, because that's going to be where we're joining and fastening off this panel. I've reached back around and I have where my slip knot was originally when we first started our project. So I'm just going to work an additional single crochet into there just to kind of tighten that up a little bit, and then I'm going to join to the first single crochet that we made and slip stitch to join, and then I'm going to make another little chain one just to fasten off. Nice long tails, because these definitely need weaving in properly. And that completes our top panel. We have a cube, and I'm going to go and wrestle my filling, which I'm hoping to use a double duvet, or what would the Americans call that? Queen, maybe a queen size duvet, into this giant kind of pillow cover. But if you have a cushion pad that you've worked to, you can now try it on and make sure that it fits. And then we need to go on to making the base of our footstools. To create your base panel, we're simply going to be repeating rows 1 to 7, the same as we did for our top panel. And then for rows 8 up to 49, we're going to repeat rows 2 to 7 a further 7 times to create a base panel that will cover our MDF, measuring 20 inches wide and 24 inches long. So go ahead and make your base panel in the exact same way that you started your top panel, and I'll see you for the edging of our base panel shortly. So once you've worked all the way up to row 49, finishing on those double strands of A and A, we are ready to work an edging all the way around this panel, and then we can get to joining this to the top of our footstool. So we're going to start by making a chain of 1, and we're going to rotate to work in the round. So make sure you've got your right side facing. And we're simply going to work 1 single crochet into each row end, just like we did for the edging of the top of the panel. So we're just simply placing one single crochet, oh, I'm working a half double, one single crochet into the end of each row all the way down, using those colours as a guide, so we don't need to work too many of them, because you don't want this to be too spaced out, because what we're doing here is actually preventing it from stretching too much, because obviously this is going to be on the bottom of our footstool. We don't want it to be saggy and baggy. We want it to be nice and tight to the wood base that we've got cut. So continue all the way down, working one single crochet into each row end, and I'm going to meet you at the first corner. Once you've worked all the way down, working one single crochet into each of these row ends, you should be where your beginning slip stitch was, and we're going to work in the other side of our chain. But first we're going to work into the wrong side of our beginning chain, or the other side of our beginning chain, and we're just going to make a little corner, working one single crochet, a chain one, and a second single crochet into that stitch, and then we're going to work into the wrong side of our chain all the way along. So you can see where the stitch is, and we're going into that hole where the chain is, and we're just working one single crochet into the other side of our beginning chain all the way along to the next corner. Just gives us a nice corner edge for the base of our footstool. When we've reached that final stitch, having worked all the way along, we're going to make a chain one and work a second single crochet into that last stitch again, just to create another corner. We can then rotate our work to work back all the way down to the next corner, working one single crochet into the end of each row, just like we did on the other side of our panel. So continue to work one single crochet into each row end, and I'll meet you for our next corner. Once you've worked all along those row ends, we've reached the top and we're back working along row 49. So we're going to work our corner into that first stitch of row 49. So we're working one single crochet, just a chain one, and a second single crochet into that same stitch. Didn't want to come through. And then we can rotate, ready to work, back to where we started working this edging. So we're working one single crochet into each stitch across, working back along the top of row 49. So continue around, then we'll be ready to fasten off and talk about attaching this base panel to your top panel, and if you're using it, your MDF. So I've just worked my final stitch. I'm going to make a little chain one, and then I'm ready to slip stitch to join into that first single crochet we made. I'm going to make a chain one, ready to fasten off. Pull that through, and all that's left is obviously to weave in all these ends, making sure that if I do have any ends out, they are on the wrong side. Now there are lots of different options to attach this to your MDF. Now I am going to be sewing my feet through this panel, but I need to make sure that this bit doesn't stretch and sag in the middle of the panel. So the way that I'm going to attach mine is I am simply going to use spray adhesive onto the MDF and then fix this, making sure that these edge stitches, or this edging that we've just made, actually sits over the edge of the MDF. So I've already pre-drilled the holes. Oh, and it's now caught. And I'm going to I'm basically going to cover this MDF with spray adhesive, and then make sure that I position this edge stitch just coming over the edge of the panel. It can be literally right on there, but I want to be able to have First and foremost, it means that I can stretch my fabric over my board, making sure that it fits all the way up, because it does look a little bit short. Can't reach up that far, sorry, but it will stretch to fit. Absolutely no problem there at all. That's the idea of it, because I want it to be a tight fit. You have lots of different options to join your top panel. So what I'm going to do is actually sew the other side. I'm going to sew the other side of the Velcro to one side of my top section to match the same edge on my MDF. So the sew and stitch, so I'm going to stick, well that was lucky, I'm going to stick the sticky bit to one edge of my MDF. This is the shorter edge. I'm going to join on all the other three sides. I'll take you downstairs into the dining room where I'm going to show you how I'm doing this in a little bit more detail. So this is a post-edit voiceover with me explaining how I'm going to be joining the legs to my MDF. So the fabric we know fits over the MDF, and I have pre-drilled those holes, and I'm simply going to feed the legs, well, the screws, through the crocheted fabric into those pre-drilled holes and simply screw them in place to keep them secure. I'm also going to, before I do the last corner, going to liberally spray my MDF with some adhesive, spray adhesive, so that fabric does not sag when I turn this over. I have tried it without, and unfortunately it does kind of drop down. So it's definitely worth using some spray adhesive before finishing that final leg, so that fabric stays where you want it to stay. And I've got that Velcro strip on the other side that matches my top panel. So once these legs are affixed, I can flip it over, and then we can get sewing the top panel to the bottom panel with our stuffing. So now I've got the Velcro on one end, the back or the bottom panel is glued. So I've used spray adhesive to hold this up. It's not perfect, so I might have to go around with my glue gun later. But now we need to attach the top to the base. So we're just going to sew this edge to that edge with hopefully a nice neat whip stitch. So I'm just using one strand on a darning needle. So I'm going to start in the corner. I'm leaving all my ends in here because it's me, and I'm just going to work through one stitch or one side of each stitch, pulling it all the way through. Just for good measure, I'm just going to tie that so it doesn't pull itself through. It's going to look a little bit neater when we're doing a whip stitch, as in just going through the bottom and then through the next stitch in the top, almost working through the equivalent of the back loop. And it's just going to join these together. And because they're two strands, it's going to be a lot easier and a lot neater. We are just going to be left, sorry, there's so many bits everywhere now. I was going to work a single crochet through, but it's just too awkward. So all I'm doing is working with one strand. I'm working through the back loop of the bottom and the front loop of the top, and literally just whip stitching it together. Probably should have started on the other side, but anyway. I'm just going to work my way around, sewing it all together, and then when I get all the three sides done, I'm going to leave my Velcro edge open because we don't need to sew that closed. You can, of course, if you want to, but I want to be able to replump. I'm using a double duvet But if you want to use cushions, or you want to store stuff in it, or you just want to seal it up once and for all, you can do. It's entirely up to you. But I want to be able to replump my cushion as we go. And it's giving that a really nice join. It's obviously not sewn. It doesn't look like it's been sewn together. And it's just going to close these edges. And that's why we've left this edge stitch open, so that we can sew nice and easily, doing a nice simple whip stitch. It's not going to stretch too much from the bottom because that is glued in place using spray adhesive. And it's just going to take the time now to sew, and I'll be back once I'm inserting my duvet. I'm just making my way to the final corner next to where my Velcro is, and I've inserted the majority of my stuffing. I've used a double duvet or a queen size duvet, and then I've supplemented that with a little bit of toy stuffing as well, just in like the corners, so that it gives it more of a nice smoother look. But yeah, we are nearly there. I'm excited to see it finished. Once you've finished sewing up all 3 sides, you can close the Velcro edge and place your footstool where it's most needed, ready to relax. Thank you as always for joining me for this tutorial. I will see you in the next video.